policy with the 90-10 aspect, but other aspects of it as well. How we assess, how we give kids feedback, how we report their progress to parents and to students. Um, and this is a K through 12 conversation. So there's folks from elementary school, middle school, high school in the room. Um, One of the things we got into this fall is really switching into a learning phase. So of course, we're always gathering more voice and input from different stakeholders, but you're basically jumping on in the learning phase here, where we're trying to understand what is best for kids, um, what things do we do now that would continue that are good for kids, what things do we not do now that we can add to that to sort of make this customized Valley View version that works for us, works for our educators, it's feasible, it works for all kids, not just some kids. It especially works for kids that our traditional systems have not always worked for in the sense of equity, but that it's realistic to be implemented by our staff and that it's something parents can understand that's not overcomplicated. So, not the easiest answer to arrive at, but we're in the learning phase now using the Grading for Equity text and some other resources around what are those practices that we will eventually zero in on. The rest of the timeline is really moving into like winter time here. We would start making some recommendations for like a revised policy to the school board about what could be a new basically procedure, what kind of changes would we start making for next fall. Um, and then we would take the spring to prepare our staff, prepare kids, prepare parents. Um, but again, this is a huge topic, so it doesn't mean we're going to change everything immediately on the first day of school next year. Could be incremental changes over time, just whatever makes sense for our system. So we want your input on, what's going to work for all these stakeholders, and we also want your input on, pace and rate of change in terms of what's realistic and what people are going to be able to implement well and understand. One of the things we've talked about in some of our other sessions, our non-negotiables are really kind of guiding our work. And one of those, and as you can tell with the Grading for Equity book, really is this idea that, you know, every grading system works for some kids. It's just like everything else we do. It's not even specific to grading, right? Certain instructional strategies work for some kids, but not for others. The key for us, every learner, every day, is our focus and our commitment. And we know, and we talked about in our earlier meetings, we have a gap in the performance of our students and how well we impact some students compared to others. And there are groups of students that historically in Valley View and outside of Valley View, we have had less of an impact on those groups of students. And there's factors that are internal to our school district that impact that, and there's societal factors that impact that, that obviously we can't change. But we do believe that we can actually come up with a system that does work for everyone, that doesn't put challenges on certain kids' plates, but not others, basically systematically. And so that's really the fundamental sort of non-negotiable for this. If we're going to go through all the work, it's worth it for us to come up with something that checks that box, basically, that we're removing obstacles for students. So thank you so much, whether you're back here or you're new tonight, for taking the time to engage in this. There's a lot going on. It's a rainy, long day, cold, rainy evening. The fact that you're taking your evening time, like, we really appreciate this. My counterpart, Maria Burgos, is our executive director for K5. Um, and so she and I have placed like a high priority, especially her, on collaborating K through 12 and making sure our systems are really coherent across the board. And I just wanted to thank her and the folks from our K5 group who have like joined this and really broadened our conversation. Because as a unit district, this should be coherent from start to finish.
We're really excited to be at the table just because our board member mentioned it earlier. We're a unit district, so we need to know the learning progression of our students starting from pre-K on and what that looks like. And especially, with the experiences our students are having when they transition from elementary to middle school and into high school. So we're really excited for the work. I'm grateful that, our elementary team is here as well. And then we're inviting some elementary teachers too, because it's important to have everyone's voice around the work that we're doing to make sure that we build a common message together around grading practices across our system. So we're glad to be here.
And just before we begin, I'll reintroduce, or to some of you, introduce Margot Sekeli. Margot is our consultant who's facilitating this work for our group. She's from the Catalyst for Educational Change, which is a local organization that supports a lot of different school improvement efforts in a lot of different contexts. Margot's personal expertise is in assessment, feedback, and grading. She's also led this work both within a district as an administrator, but also as a consultant for multiple other districts, and not just at the elementary level, at the middle and high school level as well. So we're very fortunate to have someone kind of steering our ship, supporting the discussions and the direction, who's engaged in this work already. So, and at this point, I'll turn it over to Margot, and she'll get our agenda going.
Hello, everyone. I see a lot of new faces, and I'm really excited to have more of you here. If you are at a table where you don't know anybody at your table, introduce yourself now to the people at your table. Make sure you all know each other, and then I'm briefly going to have everyone introduce who you are and what capacity you serve in the district. Just briefly, so we all get to know each other, okay? And thank you for that, there are name tags on the table if you don't mind using those. In the back table, you don't have a table tent or a box. You can either grab the stuff from here or move up here, whatever is most convenient for you. Take a minute and introduce yourselves. And then we'll get started.
Shanice Artist, Project Coordinator for the Department of Equity and Continuous Improvement at YASA.
Hi, I'm Saeed Gafour, K-5 Curriculum Coordinator.
Dan Sloan, 5th grade elementary teacher at Scoffhere.
I'm Taylor Davis. I'm an English teacher at Romanville High School.
Good evening. My name is Asya Omer, and I'm a special education teacher at BHS.
Rachel Delamorte, a coach at Humphrey.
Jamie Alvarez, ELA teacher at Humphrey.
Hi, I'm Karen Hess. I'm the director of K-5 curriculum. I forgot what I do.
I'm Maria Burgos, executive director of Ed Services Pre-K-5.
Roger Merritt. I'm the key leader for Applied Tech at the middle school level.
Hi, Kara Jenny, Director of Literacy and Social Studies 612.
Jessica DeVos, math teacher and math department chair at RHS.
Hi, I'm Caleb Scott. I teach industrial technology at Bolingbrook High School.
My name is Michael Lacasio, Director of Data and Assessment.
Adrienne Padalecchio, Coordinator of Strategic Projects.
Oh, already did that. All right. Hi.
Emily Irwin, 9th grader at BHS.
Great. Glad you're here.
Michelle De La Rosa, special education teacher, BMS, and parent.
Eileen Kilharn, 3rd grade, Oakview.
Kelly Swinski, Bolingbrook High School coach. Bridget Washburn, business teacher at Bolingbrook High School.
Thank you. Did I get everybody? You want us to do this all again?
3 again. No, just table 3.
Okay.
I wasn't recording fast enough.
That's okay.
Araceli Medina, Director Multilingual Services Department, Pre-K-12.
It was perfect the first time around.
Debbie Sikora, Board of Ed.
Jackie Lewis, assistant principal at Bolingbrook High School.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. I appreciate that. All right. If you have a device with you, we do have a folder, a participant folder, where all of this is. If you don't have your device with you, that's perfectly fine. Someone at your table does, and you can use that. If you're new here, you can get some additional information and links from Adrienne. Oh, and there are paper copies of the agenda on your table. On the back are our norms, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And then, actually, I'm going to skip the stakeholder communication. I'm not going to skip it. I'm going to give you just a brief overview of what we did at the steering committee. We're going to go and talk about our book study. Then we're going to continue the work we did last time on types of grading, which I will fill those of you that are new, I will fill you in on that. And then we're going to do our wrap up. Okay? So briefly, before we do that part, I just want to review our committee norms. They're posted here and they're on the back of the agenda that's on your table. And so we developed these together. during our second meeting together. Our first norm is, and all of these are the non-negotiable norms that we operate by, is that our decisions will be made based on research and not our own experiences and beliefs. We commit to being willing to question our current thinking and beliefs. We want people to attend consistently. Every time might not be possible, and that's okay, but if you cannot attend, make sure to review all notes and materials. If something is unclear, please ask questions. This is a safe space, even though we don't all know each other very well yet. If you don't ask your questions, we can't address them. And if you have a question, you're likely not the only person with that same question. Bring in respect, different perspectives. Be inquisitive and open-minded. Reflect before speaking. Be vulnerable and willing to take risks. And then speak your truth without fear. And while that's easy to say, sometimes we do feel some hesitation with speaking our truth. But if we don't speak our truths, we can't get to a meaningful solution. And for those of you that are new, I want to be abundantly clear. No decision is already made. We are not just paying lip service to a decision that is made. We are all working together to identify solutions that work for us. So I want us to be clear on that, because some of our non-negotiables. So we're always going to go back to those non-negotiables and make decisions that are aligned with those non-negotiables. So I think it's important that we're all aware of those and consistently refer back to those as we move forward with our decision making. So before we go any further, another quote, that change is the only constant in life. Our ability to adapt to those changes will determine your success in life. Because one of my favorite quotes is a Maya Angelou quote, which is, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, you do better. So the point is, nothing we have done in the past means we were doing bad things. We were not making bad choices. We were doing the best we can with what we know. We also know kids have changed. Society has changed. Expectations have changed. We're in the process now of learning about those changes and how we support our children better within those changes while still providing them what they need to be successful adults. So let's keep all of that in mind as we continue to do our work together. So at your table, what we're going to do is we're going to have our Grading for Equity posted.
Obviously, we talked about the math. There's a lot of math in these chapters about the zero and then like averaging not making sense, which obviously it's a nice way to kind of understand those new changes to the equitable system. And then really we were talking a lot about the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation problem and sort of like as society and as the students perhaps are extrinsically motivated at home, how can we maybe introduce some level of intrinsic motivation in the classroom, maybe small doses to combat, let's be honest, most of society is extrinsically motivated. So what can we do to kind of create a balance in the classroom that's feasible rather than just expecting them to suddenly become randomly intrinsically motivated?
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions for this group?
I can speak to something about in elementary in our district.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot less extrinsic motivation going on in the elementary classrooms. There is not candy rewards. There is a focus on student learning. And then they come to middle schools and there's candy thrown at them. That was my biggest shock going from elementary to middle, is that I watched my kids who had lights on, totally growth mindset, going to a middle school, and now they're having candy thrown at them and pizza parties and donut parties, and you can see the light go out.
Thank you.
It's hard to watch, to know how much work went into that. It's a definite switch.
I like your point about society being extrinsically motivated, because I think that's something that we often want to promote, intrinsic motivation, while at the same time, most of us are extrinsically motivated. I mean, we come to work every day because there's a paycheck at the end of it as well, right? I mean, sure,
there has to be that element. There has to be a balance of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation for all of us. For what we do.
Anyone else with a comment or a question or a thought? Okay, since I'm over here, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as far as the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, one of the things that we feel is critically important is the intrinsic motivation for students to then be able to also then take ownership of their learning, which theoretically could also happen with extrinsic, but I think with intrinsic, it's more meaningful as they then embrace the classes that they're taking, the experiences, etc., as things that are helping set them up for their future goals, success, etc.
Of course.
Hold the note over there. There's that one quote about your system. You get the results exactly as your system is designed to be.
aligned.
So I think we have all these little systems within our big system. And if we're wondering to ourselves, why aren't they more intrinsically motivated? And why, we have to say, well, we did, and it said on page 35, like we taught them to be extrinsically motivated, intrinsically motivated, whatever it is.
Thank you. Since I'm here, why don't you guys share yours?
Oh, the question? Yeah. Question.
Not the question, your notes from the your discussion.
Yeah.
Your key points?
All right, go ahead, Jamie.
It's all right.
I have some notes.
Yeah.
One of the topics that we spoke about was teachers need to have no fear of failing grades reflecting on them only. We need to take that off the table, and really that will free teachers to have those honest conversations with parents, and it has to start in elementary. Teachers need to not feel like they're going to be punished. If there are a lot of students failing, we can only help students if parents are on board. So we had a conversation about that because that impacts every part of our system. It goes right into middle and high school. We also talked about how our curriculum needs to support teachers' communication of progress on the standards. And for our work to move forward, that's something we also need to look at. Those were the two things that we really spent a lot of time talking about.
And I think too, like I'm a parent and a coach in the school. As a parent, I see my students' letter grades in Infinite Campus. And so what I'm seeing, it doesn't reflect all of what I know they're doing with their rubrics and the way they're grading and the feedback and all the formative, like as a parent, I see A, B, C, D, and what is communicated to me is based on what I think those things mean, what my family, like our values as a family, if that's acceptable or not, things like that. So it's not matching up of what's communicated to me as a parent, and especially since I know all that goes into what is reported in that grade, but I don't know that I see that as a parent.
I want to push back a little bit against the sentiment about parents have to be involved or part of it, because what you're saying then is the student will not be evaluated based upon what they do within our four walls. They're going to be evaluated based upon what their parents do. And we just have some parents who are not going to do. And are we going to say that that's okay, that those kids whose parents, for whatever reason, and I remember there was a former assistant principal that we had, I might have told this to my table last time, that said throughout her whole 4 years of high school, her parents never showed up to one thing. And it wasn't that her parents didn't love her, care for her, or were concerned, but they had to work just to keep food on the table. And that was what their first priority was. And so if you have that kind of situation where parents cannot help, then are we going to penalize the child? She wants
Hold on. I think I need to clarify that.
Can I say one other thing too? When you said that teachers shouldn't be afraid of students failing, and I think for me, there shouldn't be a fear necessarily, but if you have a whole class and a whole bunch of people are failing that class, at some point you got to question your practices in that classroom as a teacher too. You shouldn't be afraid necessarily that you're gonna lose your job or pack up a box before the end of the day, but you definitely should be reflective on why do I have so many kids that are not performing well in my class.
The parent communication part was more of that we need to communicate with parents. Not that parents have to be on board, but that we need to communicate with the parents. Parents don't know unless we tell them. Like, they assume that unless we say something, that their kid's doing fine. And if we don't open up that door of communication, we're failing the parents, we're failing our students, because we have to assume the best intent. Parents need to know. And I think that's where there's that breakdown.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. All right, will you guys share your thoughts from your discussion?
We got a little chatty, so we only got through the
Good.
first chapter.
That's
so
okay.
I apologize.
No problem.
We did affirm that teacher-student relationships can be affected by traditional grading practices. We did say that learning should be a joy, and unfortunately with our current systems, that tends to suck the joy out of learning. Students should feel comfortable making errors in a grade-free zone, kind of called it like a little sandbox. And students do tend to play the game in chasing points. So we kind of all affirm that we've probably done the same as well, but the system kind of has created that. So.
Thank you. Thoughts or responses for this table? Remember in that video we saw with the author of this book and his colleague talked about being the point fairy? That's what that conversation reminded me of. All right, let's come over here.
We actually talked more about the chapter 4 about the grading percentages and all the math behind it. My brain immediately went to the fact that not only is it a 90-10 system, but it's a 25% final, which means that the 90-10 is really broken down to 67.5 and 7.5, which is 75% right of the final grade, which is 98% of the semester, but 75% of the grade. And then I know that gets really complicated and we could talk about that for hours, but just that concept of how students are performing on the final at the end of the term, that's worth 25% of the grade, and that sometimes that they may not do so well in that final, and then that entire 98% of their time spent in that semester is now hurt by a final that they spend 3 days taking, almost 6 to 7 finals for most students. So that concept we talked about a little bit, and then the concept of hard and easy grading teachers, that impacts the student anxiety and teacher expectations of either themselves or their students, and the concept of giving expectations to teachers about being consistent and not creating that difference of opinions and past practices or best practices, which led us to a final question of, are teachers ready to accept that they could be doing something that is not in best practice, and who gets to tell them that they're not doing that?
Welcome to our community. All righty, comments, thoughts, questions for this group? Yep.
So I like how you brought up the final exam being worth so much of their final grade. I think that is inequitable for like the flip side, like the kid who doesn't come to class and does almost nothing but can just skate by with a 60% for just doing, a couple of hours worth of work. What does that tell to the students who were there every day and did all of the work and they got to pass the class? So I think it kind of goes the flip side as well.
What if that student skated by all semester because he was bored and already knew the content and showed up at the final and showed that he knew the content?
Well, your question was, what does that tell the student or the students? But I think the question is like, what do you want it to tell them? Do you want it to tell them something about their grade? Do you want it to tell them something about their learner behaviors? Do you want it to tell them something about how you feel about their effort? So I think that's more of the question.
I was going to add on too. I think that's a good point that she brought up is what do you want it to tell? Because to me, that would tell me that if they got a 60%, that's what they know at that point in time, and that whether they were in class or not is not part of the grade, but could be reported differently. And through communication, I would think we would have to be communicating, and hopefully before the final, that student was not coming to class. But I think just by the grade on the final, that's just giving us one piece of information about the student. But if that's what we're reporting in that grade is what they know at that point in time when they took it, then that would accurately reflect what they know at that moment in time.
I also wanted to add that that's a rare event. I find that typically when students are missing such a large, huge amount of class, like I've got students in my class that have come to school maybe twice. A few of them have come 3 or 4 times. They are not typically, it's been a rare, I can't think of a time that students has missed a great deal of school and has just been able to pass the class by coming for a final for maybe a couple of days.
You guys shared yours yet?
No.
No. Okay.
Quinn. I've been talking too much. Don't Quinn. You're outnumbered.
Okay, so we talked a lot about relationships with parents, relationships with students, positive relationships between teachers and students. Because one of the things it seemed like he intimated was this idea that under our traditional system, that damages our relationships. But I do think that we have a lot of teachers who go beyond that, and that does make up for some of the systematic issues we have. We talked about bias and subjectivity, and how even if you change the grading system, there is always going to be some subjectivity to a grade, and that bias can still creep in, and it's really mitigating that bias. You can't really get rid of it completely. The omnibus grade really doesn't help anybody, doesn't help the student, the parent, the teacher, or the next teachers, because you really don't know where it comes from. I think we all agree behavior shouldn't be in the grade because it distorts everything. And then our question that's going to find its way in another category is, what does equitable grading look like for parents that is easy to read, easy to understand, consistent between teachers and departments, especially when you have 6 classes, 7 classes at the high school or middle school level, and how would that even look? So,
thank you. Thoughts, comments? Okay, let's come up. Let's see. You guys have talked. Let's come here.
Oh, thanks. We talked about something, I believe there was this table talked about, is that in life, most things are extrinsic. You get paid. Why do you come to work? Is that intrinsic? Are you going to come to work and not get paid? So I have mixed emotions about extrinsic and extrinsic, but that was one comment we made. We talked about the fact that at Valley View we have the PLC, and I can't relate to that because I wasn't a part of that, where they work together for a common grading practice. We also talked about rubrics as sometimes being subjective in what we grade with the rubric. On the other one, okay, our question was, how do we think intrinsic and extrinsic motivation impacts students' learning? And what's the ideal grading scale look like? Do any of us know? Okay, and that's part of the concern that we have. And I think we need more teacher input on that. I think, remember, I can't be fired, okay? I think some of us have been out of the classroom too long, and the teachers that we have in here need to make more of an impact on how we feel about some of the things we're discussing.
Thank you. Thoughts, comments?
So I was just thinking something as you were talking about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and I think it's really powerful to think like, yes, we're all extrinsically motivated by certain things. If I didn't get a paycheck for my work here in this district, I wouldn't come here and do this work because I need to provide for my family, right? But what I do think of is like it's the passion that, and all of us here evidence this by being here this late at night, right? This is an intrinsic motivation about like what we believe about students and society and like how. So I think in trying to navigate whatever the best grading system is to like inspire those things, it's about, yes, there's going to be some extrinsic motivation because you want to graduate high school, you want to pass your classes, you want to, get the A and get the discount on your parents' insurance. But you also hopefully are uncovering a passion that is going to intrinsically motivate you to like finish college or start a career or go above and beyond and do that extra work that no amount of pay is, well, at least in education, we know we're not getting that, right? It's not a pay incentive really that gets us here. So I'm not sure what we'll uncover is the best way to do that, but I hope that we can think through how grading could impact that piece.
Comments on that? Oh, yep.
That, Karen, your comment made me think about, I think earlier we said that most of life is extrinsic. And now that I'm starting to think about that, I don't know that that's true, because I think about like also going back to your job, like teachers that are going home and grading papers, they're not getting paid hourly. They're giving students feedback because they're intrinsically motivated so that their students do well. And then I also think about just like hobbies that you're involved in that people do on their own at home. There's a lot of things I do that I don't get paid for because I'm intrinsically motivated. My daughter will come home and write a narrative story in 4th grade that it's not for school because she's intrinsically motivated to write a story. So in life, I think if we're thinking like monetary, like of money because we need it to provide for our families, then yes, but in life, I don't think we're mostly extrinsically. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think there's a lot of intrinsic that you do to make yourself feel good and feel like a member of society and that you've made a difference. I think that's kind of what keeps you going as a person.
I want to think about this from an equity lens because we are all in a position where we had some choice. And we chose, hopefully, a career that provided us both the extrinsic motivation of a good paycheck, well, relative to other paychecks. I'm going to say that, relative to other paychecks, and something that also feeds our passion. When we talk about that parent that you were talking about, where both parents have to work 2 jobs just to put food on the table, they are extrinsically motivated. I was working with another school earlier this week, and the students were off school, and I got to the school at 7 a.m., and a mom and her son from the middle school were walking to the laundromat with big loads of laundry in their arms, and they were doing that together. And that's what it took for them to work together to get their laundry done. So that was going to be a large project for them because they don't have those facilities in their home to take care of that. And so, I mean, I think we have to understand that sometimes our motivation depends on where we are in our lives. And so when we think about the work we're doing, isn't that something we want to stop happening? Is to make the systemic racism and the systemic inequities in our culture erase or at least be mitigated somewhat. Okay, I normally try not to give my opinion here, but I couldn't help it on that one. You guys ready to share? Sure. Okay.
So a lot of what we talked about has been touched on by various tables already, but some quotes that really stuck with us were, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So talking about those relationships that have already been mentioned. And then also talking about the elementary, middle school, high school transition, where at the elementary level, which again has already been mentioned, that there aren't those extrinsic rewards as much as there are in middle or high school, or maybe in some middle schools, is what we talked about. And then bias. So thinking about the student that doesn't turn in a homework assignment or is missing 5 points, how the teacher feels about that student. You know, there's a lot of bias involved with the grades.
Ideas around the communication that will need to take place and all the various stakeholders and how, like what our plan and our approach will be to communicate the work that's being done here with all the different
stakeholders.
Someone else with more information. Go ahead.
Yeah, just
Additional
piggybacking
information.
off of that, we were thinking of ideas on how we can get the rest of the schools in the district sort of streamlined with all the same information that we talk about here. That way, it's not just the 20 of us that are informed, but it's everybody in our departments back at our schools and everything too. So.
And if you don't have anything to add, that's okay. That's not a bad thing.
I'll add. I think one of the most important points that comes to my mind is sharing the communication now to all teachers, because we know that stuff, like there's voices already happening at the building, so we want to make sure we're proactive and that everyone knows immediate steps, like what are we doing? I know you mentioned no decision has been made. Creating a Google form to get teachers' feedback, like after, like Maria mentioned, if we share a common message to everyone, there's a Google form that teachers could input their questions so that it's brought back to us. And outlining, I know you shared like what's going to happen, that timeline. What are we doing as a committee? November, December, January, what does that look like so that we all are aware?
Anything else? Anyone?
We also just talked about the importance of saying why traditional grading, why it doesn't work, and why other systems are better, because some teachers probably don't know that information, or maybe many teachers don't.
Our table talked a little bit more about more applicable data for our current system and getting some student voice or parent voice on the systems of grading that they currently, or scale of gradings that they currently have been using, and what has made them feel the most success from the grades.
I know we also talked about how just like once we've shared the message, just getting the message out too, that we're still looking for more members. So we'd still like more voice in this larger committee, and hopefully maybe some people will choose to join us after they hear more.
One of my key points I keep bringing up is that we need more teachers on this committee. We need your input. We need to know how you feel about the grading system and truly how you feel in your classroom with some of the things that decisions are made. The board members usually go with what is presented to us, okay? Unless we have some real definite ideas that are different. So, you know, what happens in this committee is very important.
Thank you. And just the other piece of this is that the communication has to be two-way. It's not about us telling them something. It's about all of us being part of conversations and gathering information and bringing it back so that people's voices are heard. So it's not just the people in this room making those decisions, but we're representing people, not just ourselves. So we want to make sure that that's embedded into the work that we're doing. That's why you created questions, because that's one of the several ways we want to get input and feedback from the rest of our committee, or the rest of our teachers and administrators. Now, eventually, sooner rather than later, we're going to be ready to get parent input. We're not quite there yet, but we're going to do that soon, okay? Thank you all for letting me put you on the spot. I appreciate it. All right, so last time we were together, we looked at a couple of different types of grading systems. Oh, wait, before I do that, I totally forgot. Just a reminder that our next meeting is November 15th. And by then, if you will have read chapters 5, 6, and 7, and there's some questions up here. Now, in that participant folder, October 25th folder, this entire slide deck is in there with this reminder in there, if you want to make sure that you have a couple ways of going back and referring to it. And Adrienne always sends out reminders, so you'll get this in a variety of ways. So that will be next. And then for those of you that like to think ahead, this is what we're doing for the next two meetings after that, December 6th and January 24th. Okay? So that should get us to the end of the book. We're not reading every single page in the book. We are reading the bulk of it, however. Okay, so now we're going to go into our types of grading systems. So there are 4 main types of grading systems. Traditional, which can be either norm referenced or criterion referenced, or some combination in some ways.
proficiency-based grading, competency-based grading, and standards-based grading. So last time, we looked at the first two systems. We did individual research by table, and then we connected the tables, one that did traditional, one that did proficiency-based grading, and then they shared their information with each other. After that, and then they put that in, each table put the information on a chart paper, which you'll get in a minute. Then we all did a gallery walk, read the information, and then used Post-it notes to put questions or clarifications that we need. So we're going to do the same thing again with the last two, competency-based grading and standards-based grading. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tables. So I'm going to put you together. Each table is going to do one type, and then you'll connect with the next another table that did the different system, and then compare from there. So I'm going
Notes from reading will go on whatever table number you're in.